Welcome to another episode of Crowsdale Village's very own talk show, Know Your Neighbor. I hope you joined us last week for our inaugural episode with Ruth Ann Anderson, a wild duck rehabilitator. Every resident here at Crowsdale and every person in the world has a story. We're like libraries full of different chapters, all that led us to where we are today. Sometimes when you meet a person, you're just seeing their current page. Our idea with this show is to learn more about each other, more than what we see in this current moment. Today, I am thrilled to welcome our second ever guest to Know Your Neighbor, my friend, Dr. Tom Krakauer. If you live at Crowsdale, you probably know Dr. Tom. Maybe from his bright yellow suspenders, his sense of humor, or his smile that you can see as he zooms around the community. Dr. Tom was one of the first people I met here at Crowsdale when I delivered some vegan burgers to his apartment. And I'm so excited that he has agreed to talk today, because he's not just a familiar face at Crowsdale, but he's somewhat of a local celebrity in the city of Durham. So without further ado, Dr. Tom.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here.
I am honored. I've been admiring you since we first met, and I'm just ecstatic that you've agreed to chat with me. And thank you for your patience as we're still working out the kinks of this program. You are very kind to be a guinea pig.
I am so glad to be here and to do that.
Thank you. Well, I want to start just by asking, how are you doing? I know that 2020 has been a bit of a wild ride. How are you doing, Dr. Tom?
I've been doing very well. I enjoy my apartment so much, and I enjoy the friendships that I'm making here at Crowsdale. So I'm doing well.
I'm glad to hear it. You do have a very nice apartment. I can see how that would feel like a peaceful oasis and not somewhere that you have to be, but that you want to be. Well, let's get into your story. Let's start at the very beginning. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born in Buffalo, New York. My parents escaped from the horrors of the Hitler Germany, and we settled in a small town called Boston, New York. I practically lived all of my days with my feet in the creek at the bottom of our property, looking for crayfish and trying to catch fish, or climbing a tree to read.
So you were outside from a very early age.
I was, yes.
And is that what inspired you to first join Boy Scouts?
Yeah, I enjoyed being outdoors and being with nature. And interestingly enough, Boston, New York was a town of about 500 people that included a dairy farm across the street.
Did you ever sneak into that dairy farm?
You know, I went to the dairy farm with my brother, and we had a squirt gun fight on either side of a cow. Me on one side and he on the other side. And that's something I will always remember.
And you weren't using water guns, but the cow's udders, is that correct?
This was utterly ridiculous.
Well, you know, kids these days, it seems like they're all on their electronics and on their phones and iPads. I bet they would love to have an utterly ridiculous cow milk fight.
That you'll have to ask them that. I was involved with the Boy Scouts, and I enjoyed the camping and that sort of thing. And I had teachers who really inspired me to enjoy nature.
Do you have one teacher in particular that stands out?
Well, Mrs. Cummings was my fifth grade teacher, and we would walk around the grounds of the school, and she would identify trees for me, and so that set me on a good path.
With your fifth grade teacher and with your mom instilling that love of nature in you, did you ever think that that would become a full-time profession as an adult?
Well, it inspired me to have a love of nature, but I'm not sure that it set me on a course to go into the museum world. I studied zoology for a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD, and it was only later that I decided I wanted to involve myself more closely with the community in the museum field.
You're giving a little teaser by talking about the museum world. If you don't know already, and we'll get to this in detail later, but Dr. Tom was formerly the director of the beloved Museum of Life and Science in Durham that I'm sure many of you have visited. When he came on board, it was not yet the Museum of Life and Science, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, you're being very humble by talking about Boy Scouts and not mentioning your great achievement at 12 years old.
Okay. At age 12, I earned my Eagle Scout, which it's pretty unusual to get an Eagle Scout that young.
It is pretty unusual and very impressive to be an Eagle Scout at 12 years old. What other things were you doing as a kid? You were obviously spending a lot of time in Scouts. What else did you like to do to pass your time?
Well, it was mostly getting outside and enjoying nature.
Something you still love to do as just a slightly older kid now. So you mentioned that you have multiple degrees. Walk us through your education from high school on.
Well, I graduated from high school in Buffalo, and I went to the University of Rochester for a bachelor's in biology, and then I went down to the University of Miami for a master's in biology, and then on to the University of Florida for a PhD in zoology. And then my first job was at Hollins University in Roanoke, Virginia, where I primarily worked with undergraduates, and that set me on a course to really have a more of an interest to be involved in the community, because after you are involved with salamander walks or butterfly walks or mushroom walks, those are things that don't really apply to undergraduate college, and that was with the Science Museum of Western Virginia, and that was as a volunteer. And when they decided they wanted to hire a director, I applied and was fortunate to get the position.
So that was your foray into the museum world, was
Yeah.
after being a professor and being in the classroom. And like you said, it sounds like you missed that larger community aspect that was maybe absent with the undergraduate curriculum. How did you feel with that first job at the Science Museum in Virginia? Did you feel like your education and your background and your training had prepared you for a career in the museum world, or was there a steep learning curve there in that industry?
Well, the transition from the academic world to the museum world was more really focusing on the community as opposed to browbeating freshmen.
Were you a tough professor? You were browbeating the freshmen?
Of course. What else do professors do?
I'm sure you were a gentle and loving professor.
I was a gentle browbeater, yes.
A gentle browbeater. I'm sure that is a great reputation to have. I believe it. So, what were some of the things you did in that first role as the director at the Science Museum in Virginia? Did you bring on some initiatives to connect to the community more? I know that was something that you had taken that role on with the interest of doing.
Being involved as a museum director, it certainly is more involved with fundraising and management issues, and I seem to do pretty well at that.
You didn't browbeat during the fundraising and management.
That's correct. But I didn't browbeat my donors.
You did browbeat your donors?
I did not.
Sometimes, you got to do what you got to do for the fundraising, right?
That's right.
So how long were you at that Science Museum in Virginia before making the move to the Bull City?
Well, I was there for about 13 years in a transition from no facilities to being part of a nice downtown facility. And then I was approached by the Museum of Life and Science to come here, and it seemed like a good step for me because I really liked Durham, and the museum was both indoor and outdoor, and had some important intellectual goals.
And you mentioned before that you feel like Durham is, in general, a highly intellectual community, right? So when you were hired to come to Durham, were you already familiar with this area, with this town?
Yeah, no, I was not. I drove through here after a Thanksgiving vacation down at the Outer Banks, and I really liked the facility, the nature, and saw that a lot could be done to help it step up.
So when you were hired by what is now known as the Museum of Life and Science, it was a little bit of something else at the time, right? The Durham Children's Museum?
It functioned as the Durham Children's Museum, but its focus was not hands-on science, and its focus was not to relate the museum to all of the exciting things that were happening in the Research Triangle. And those were my goals.
You've said to me before that you wanted to not only increase that hands-on experience at the museum, but also, like you said, that connection to the wider community. Why is the hands-on aspect, and anyone who's been to the Museum of Life and Science can attest that there are so many incredible hands-on experiences. It's one of my favorite places in the city. Why was that aspect, the hands-on, the touching and feeling and doing, rather than what you may think of at a museum as just sort of the looking, why was that so important to you?
Well, I could explain it in terms of a museum director type jargon.
Hey, try us out.
But I would rather not do it that way. I would much prefer to tell it from probably one of my best experiences at the museum. I was walking through the museum, and there was a boy, probably about 10 years old, and his father, and they were working on the tornado exhibit.
Oh, I love the tornado exhibit.
And I said hi, and then just continued on to what I had to do. And about 10 minutes later, they were still there. And so I came back, and I introduced myself. And the boy said, "Oh, this is my favorite museum." And I asked him, "Well, what were some of your other museums?" And he mentioned the Exploratorium in San Francisco and the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And I said, "I am very impressed that you feel so strongly about this." And so then I asked him why. And he said, and it's something that sticks with me ever since, and he said, "You know, the exhibits that you have here, the more time you spend with them, the more you learn." And so, you know, to answer your previous question, that's what the hands-on exhibits are all about. The more time you spend with them, the more you learn. And I got a kick out of it because the kid said, "You know, there's some children at this museum who don't understand that."
I wonder where that child is now. We might need to.
I'm sure he's got a PhD in something, but that thought and memory of what makes the memory that makes the museum so important. You know, there's some museum director type jargon like interactive exhibits, and people learn best what they almost already know. And I really don't want to say that, because what the kid said says it all. The more time you spend with the exhibits, the more you learn. And that's what makes the museum so great.
I feel the same way as a museum visitor myself. And one of my favorite parts of the museum is that it's really fun. And like you said, you learn more the longer you're there and the more time you spend with those hands-on exhibits. Something I think is really neat is that it doesn't feel like typical learning. It feels like fun. And then you realize, oh, I've learned a lot.
I almost already knew that.
And I have to tell you that one of my favorite memories of my whole life is volunteering with a nonprofit for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I've done that since high school, and every summer we bring a group to the Museum of Life and Science. And there's a level of accessibility at the museum with that hands-on aspect where anyone with any type of ability or maybe other learning styles, there's something for everyone to do and to learn, and that sparks joy. So I just want to say thank you for that. That's been a really special experience.
Well, thank you very much for saying that.
It's true. So you were at the museum, you were shaking things up, and your methodology of kind of teaching people what they almost already know really increased the visitors, right? There was a big boost in people coming to the museum.
Well, when I came there, we had about 80,000 visitors a year, and by the time I left, it was about 550,000. So that certainly makes a difference, and part of it is just we were able to expand, we were able to grow, and you know, with the museum, the bigger you are, the more people want to come. But it was also being able to really cement that vision of interactive science.
I have to ask, was the Butterfly House an addition that you made in your tenure there?
Yes, the Butterfly House was developed under my tenure, yes.
That's one of my favorite parks, which I'm sure is a popular opinion of many visitors. So looking back on, how long were you at the Museum of Life and Science?
From 75 to, I think, 2002.
Okay, so looking back on those 25 plus years, if my math is correct, 27 years, don't quiz me on that. What would you say, I'm sure this is a difficult question, but can you pinpoint one or two highlights of your time there?
Well, obviously, the building and opening the Butterfly House. I am very pleased to receive a number of honors and being able to talk to Congress twice. But just the quality of the staff that we were able to attract is something that will stick with me. So those three things are what stick in my mind most.
I have had friends, I grew up in Durham, who worked at the Museum of Life and Science, most of them as camp counselors. And it's not just the visitors that love the museum, but I've also heard from them how fun it is to work there. And I think that's a testament to the foundation that you built. So on behalf of everyone who's been to the Museum of Life and Science, thank you for all your work there. And they did find out we were doing this interview, and they said to send you their love and appreciation. Your legacy lives on there today. So after you left the Museum of Life and Science, what was next?
My wife passed away, and I took a couple of years off, and then I was invited to join the planning committee for the Museum of Durham History. And so I did that, and we got started to build a Museum of Durham History, and were very, very fortunate to be able to involve Katie Spencer in the museum, because I had the reputation, I knew how to raise money, I knew how to get people involved, but Katie was the one who was able to transform our vision of what a hands-on history museum would be, because there aren't many of them. And, Durham has got Bennett Place and Duke Homestead, so it's got a couple, and Black Wall Street. It's got a couple of institutions that really highlight a single individual or a single point in time, but it does not have an institution that represents the span of Durham's history. And so that's what we've been able to do with the museum.
I think that's really neat to notice that gap that needed to be filled of telling a more widely encompassing story of our city. We have, like you said, those great places that tell a certain part of the history. And I think you're right, it's important to look at it from a more holistic view. I found an article online, of course, when I was doing my research, as any investigative journalist would do. And I learned about the Dish lawsuit that ended up benefiting that Durham History Museum. Can you tell me in your own words about that lawsuit?
In 2009, I received a spam call from somebody who represented Dish, but he pretended that he wanted to get me to convert from DirecTV to Dish. And he called DirecTV and impersonated me. and also to get information about my account, and also got information about my investments. And that, when I found that out, I was frosted. I mean, I use stronger words than that. And, I called the state attorney general's office, and I also called escalated calls in Dish Network and found out more about the person who called me. And then I received a call from a couple of attorneys who were taking on Dish and asked me if I'd be willing to be the class representative. And I was still mad. And so I said sure, I would. And between 2009, when I got the call, and 2014, when we placed a suit, and 2019, when it went to trial, I was involved with this, and we won the case. And we won the jury decided that we should get $20 million for what Dish had done. And the judge, in her decisions thereafter, said, well, there really is no way that Dish could have done this, placed these calls accidentally, and so she trebled the damages. And so it's $62 million, and Dish appealed and lost the appeal. Dish took it to the national U.S. Supreme Court, and they refused to action it. So this is the first class action suit against a telemarketer that has gone to trial and has won. And there were, I think, about 1,100 people in the class. And the thing that unified us is that we had all filed the federal, we were all on the do not call list, the federal do not call list. And Dish chose to ignore that. So that's the Dish Network. I get $4,000. So I don't get much of the $60 million, but I will get $4,000.
You will get $4,000 and the satisfaction of bringing down Dish.
Yes and yes.
And also, you struck a deal where some of that money benefited the New Durham History Museum, right? How did that work out?
Well, normally in a class action lawsuit, the class representative gets some additional money out of the suit. And when I was asked by the Dish attorney, was I hoping to get a lot of money out of this? And my response was, well, I really didn't expect to get anything more than the other people in the class got, and which is something that the jury says. And so the judge, my attorneys asked the judge for some extra money to represent all of the time that I had spent on the case. And the judge said, well, he said that he didn't expect to get anything more than the other members of the class did, so we won't give him any extra money. And so I suggested to my attorneys that they should provide some extra money, but not to me, but to go to the Museum of Durham History. So that's the long story.
You clearly love Durham. I agree. It's the best city in the world. What are some of your favorite spots in Durham? For example, do you have a favorite outdoor area, like a park or something like that?
Well, I lived along the Little River, and so I could walk, about 200 yards from my house down to the river, where I saw beaver and otter, and just enjoyed a lot of nature. So that, I really don't want to mention this park or that, because nothing can compare to the place where I lived for so long.
That leads me to my next question of not just in Durham, but what are some of the incredible places that you've traveled or seen nature? I know you've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different butterfly species. What are some trips you've taken in search of incredible nature?
Well, I've been an avid bird watcher since the late 1940s. And so I have gone on a number of bird watching trips to most of South America, to Europe, to Africa, and to Australia. And one of the more interesting trips was I took a cruise from Anchorage to Attu, which is the island at the end of the Aleutian chain, to go bird watching there. So in spite of what some other people say, I have actually seen Russia from the United States.
That is pretty impressive. What advice do you have for kids of all ages, so everyone, who may feel intimidated by science?
I'm not sure that my interests are science with a capital S, because they're more nature. And so you don't need any special training to get out there and appreciate the caterpillar that you see. And so I think the word appreciate, enjoy, understand are the things that are most important. And as you get older, you start reading to make the scientific connections between, what a monarch requires in terms of milkweed and how they fly down to Mexico to spend the winter. So, I think the enjoyment and appreciation is the most important thing.
I think also to really enjoy and appreciate, there has to be a certain amount of intentionality, which comes from slowing down. And I think in this current generation and this time in our lives, people are always go, 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 go. And sometimes if you just slow down and look up at the trees or look down at the flowers and caterpillars, that's when it can really all start. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and all of us today, and also just for reminding me to slow down and see the beautiful nature that's all around us. So this has been an incredible experience for me to get to learn from you, and I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Tom, for taking the time to let all of us better get to know our neighbor. So thank you again for being here.
And glad to do it, and look forward to talking people in the halls.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tom. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Know Your Neighbor. Thank you to the other Life Enrichment team members, Krissa and Denise. We will see you next week. Have a good one.